Who is Marika the Eternal? Well, it's easy to say that she's the reason for like 99% of what happened in Elden Ring. Almost every event can be traced back to her. Is she an evil person? It's hard to say exactly. What she did was obviously bad, questionable, and heinous, but I don't think it's easy to label her as a simple villain, because I believe her origin is very obscure. Most characters in FromSoft games are big figures, either good or bad. They don't actually know why they're the way they are, right? Pontiff Solvin is evil, but what drove him to his actions? Or Gwyn, we know how much he destroyed the world for his own rule, but why was he so afraid of the dark? Or Sister Fried, why is she such a fucking bitch? That's what we'll be delving into this video, using the complex lore of Elden Ring to deduce a theory that is so much within the realm of speculation I might as well be a prophet. Bloodborne Remaster will be announced the moment you're on your deathbed. Before we get into the video, there's a few things I have to say. The first thing is, please like and subscribe. I love making lore content, it'd be nice if you guys support it. The second thing is, I'm kinda lazy, so I won't be putting up any evidence. Okay, this is me from the future. I decided I would put evidence in because it's actually kind of based on a lot of item descriptions. Anyway. Third, this video is a theory and probably flawed. Anything I say can be challenged. If you have an argument, go talk to a wall. Leave it in the comments. I'd love to discuss it with you guys. Fourth, this isn't meant to be a conclusive theory, just the best interpretation for story's sake. I might ignore evidence because it makes no fucking sense to my theory. With that out of the way, now let's delve into the history of Elden Ring. Convoluted mess of a plot, the long march of a journey, the story of Marika, who lived cowering from consequences. Oh, anything but the jar. By this point, we all know that Marika was descended from the shamans from, well, the shaman village. A hidden village in Altus Plateau, out of sight and out of mind. Mind and sight of the Hornsents. Why were they hiding from the Hornsents? Well, the Hornsents were a group of furries that had a blending fetish, because the canon reason as to why the Hornsets were looking for the shamans was because they were good mixing agents. The shamans be rich in monoglycerates of fatty acids E471. The other reason is more philosophical and kind of makes sense, but it's a reach, but I personally love the theory. The Hornsents somewhat worshipped the Crucible, the furry aspect giver, and they saw anything normal as unsainted. The theory is basically, to access the Altus Plateau and get to the Shaman village, you need the All-Mother gesture to open the gate in Shadow Keep. It can be a reference to Messmer and Marika, but I think it's because the Shaman worship a sort of mother, the formless mother. Which makes sense in context of the Hornsents claiming that being put in a jar is to achieve sainthood, at least in the English version. Okay, if the shaman village was hidden away, how did the Hornsents find it? Maybe they stumble upon it one day. That is boring. I want bloodshed. Marika is the reason why. When a kid is young, curious, stupid, and naive, they sneak out of the house because it felt freeing. Marika went out at night and perhaps was spotted by a Hornsent. They followed her back and came back with an entire army of dancing warriors and divine beasts. This is the first moment that leads to all of Marika's actions. Because of her actions, as innocent as it was, carried devastating consequences. Her people were transported one by one to Bonnie Village. Every single one of them blended into an amalgamation that was a divine ritual to achieve the ultimate furry form. Racked with fear, guilt, grief, Marika became the absolute candidate for the entity that would mistakenly give its grace to the biggest coward in Elden Ring history. Her actions were sponsored by the most cowardly of the outer gods as well. Through the two fingers, or the greater will itself, it reached out to her. Dost thou yearn for redemption? Dost thou long for the will and strength to seek vengeance? Encompass the greater will within thee. Becometh the Empyrean of my life, ascendeth to God, lay waste to our blasphemies. Marika agreed to be an Empyrean, but not just because she was afraid of the consequences at the time. There was someone left she could lose. Her brother-in-law. This part of the lore is nonsensical. Why is Malekith a half-brother in the English translation, but a brother-in-law in the Japanese translation? This part is stupid. Anyways, scared of what would happen to him, she must have taken him along with her. They must have ran then to the lands between. Was it debt, compassion, care, responsibility? Whatever the reason may have been, the brother-in-law became became a half-woven warrior, Marika's very own shadow, Malekith. Her first task with Malekith was to kill the previous Empyrean, the Glow-Eyed Queen. Yes, I drew that myself. The Glow-Eyed Queen was an Empyrean who wielded the Rune of Death and used the Black Flames to become a god killer. I am disregarding the theory that she fucked Placidusax. It's not clear who they killed, but they clearly killed enough gods to create literal attires from their skin. The power of the Black Flame must have scared the Greater Will. They fought, and Marika and Malekith were victorious. They claimed the Rune of Death, destined death. Malekith must have wielded the Rune of Death, keeping it close to him, like a femur bone or a dog toy, but he probably didn't seal it. The Black Flame still had the power of god killing, but at the time, maybe they didn't know, so they just straight up left it alone for who knows how long. So by this point, there are conflicting timelines that just don't make sense. Probably because the DLC story wasn't fully polished to explain the main game in retrospect, because a few things. Godfrey was the one who led the war against the Fire Giants, so that must have been after Messmer's purge of the Hornsens, during the Age of the Erdtree, after the Golden Order was established, and before Godwyn's birth, which conflicts with Melena's birth. Melena had to be born the same time as Messmer. Why? Her seal left eye possesses the power of the Glow-Eyed Queen, according to theories at least. And that must have happened very early in Elden Ring's history. But Melena claimed to have been born at the foot of the Erdtree, which was so long after that. And there are some things that allude that Melena burned the crucible before Marika turned it into the Erdtree. Then we have to consider who the parents are to Melena and Messmer, who are clearly direct siblings. And there's only one red-headed motherfucker, Radagon. So let's take this side quest to learn about the Finger Maiden, Melena. Dry Finger Maiden Hole. I have several theories to propose in regards to Melena, but let's state the facts first. Melena is heavily implied to be the sibling of Messmer, as they both bore a vision of fire. Here's the weird bit: Melena is clearly not an Empyrean or a demigod, while Messmer, the eldest son, is a demigod. So that means Messmer had to be born after Marika ascended in Inner Limb. Messmer has red hair and is afflicted with the Abyssal Serpent, much like how Malenia and Miquella are both afflicted. From that, it's quite clear that Messmer was born of Marika and Radagon. Now, what is a demigod? In general, a god has to fuck something that isn't a god, as the child will only be half of the god. That's literally the plot of all Percy Jackson. That means Radagon has to exist prior to Marika's ascension, and Radahn, Ranni, and Rykard are demigods by legality. They are demigod stepchildren, not actually demigods. That would make sense, as Malenia and Miquella wouldn't have been demigods either. They would have just been gods. To simplify with math, god plus god equals god, god plus non-god equals demigod. Get it? This logic is also true for Morgoth and Mohg. I don't know about Godric. He's a bit of a handful. I don't want to get my hands on him in this theory. To argue with, but if Marika is a god and split herself, that means they're half-gods. Okay, then half-god plus half-god equals god. Two halves make a whole. Now, Marika must have split herself apart long before her ascension at the Divine Gates, as that must have been one of the requirements to ascend to godhood. Miquella was an Empyrean and had a consort. He went through all this shit just to get his brother to pound his ass. It must be a requirement, okay? Marika must have had a consort too. This specific shot of her grabbing like pubic hair or something, I don't know, must have been Radagon. I don't know who else it could be. With that out of the way, Radagon is not a god. He is just a split of Marika before her ascension. Now, who is Melena? Theory 1. She was born from Marika and Radagon prior to Marika's ascension with a purpose to seal the Glow-Eyed Queen and burn the Erdtree. Theory 2, she's literally the Glow-Eyed Queen who had been charmed or something. Marika must have been good at charming people because she was able to seduce the furries. Then Marika adopted Melena. Not blood related because she kinda has purple hair, and using genotypes to explain it, since Marika is the main parent, we'll assume she'll carry the dominant trait. G for golden hair and R for red hair. G and G equals gold hair. G and R equals gold hair, and R equals red hair. Even if the genes were codominant, then the hair hair would be gold and red, not purple. That would be aligned with Messmer being Marika's eldest child. I can't believe I'm pulling up high school bio class notes for the shit. Melina is probably a contingency by Marika. She must have been dubious of her order long before she fully established it. Why else would she keep around a child that can burn the Earth Tree when she purged an entire race of giants who can burn the Earth Tree? Because Melina doesn't serve the Golden Order and has forgotten her initial purpose given by Marika. She actively chose to burn the Earth Tree to stop stagnation. Sometimes I feel like Melina was put into the game last because they just needed a level up Maiden, because there's almost nothing about who she is.
In the embrace of Messmer's flame.
Marika, having established the Golden Order and Leyndell, she went back to the Lands of Shadow and seduced the Hornsents. How exactly? Well, two ways are the answer. But before that, let's talk about the Hornsents first. The Hornsents are a tribe that worshipped the Crucible and reveled in the process of achieving godhood. I mean, they had a fucking gate to ascend to godhood, but obviously the Crucible isn't a god. It's just a primordial essence that gave its blessings to life through the aspects of the Crucibles. Horns, tails, furry aspects, you know? The Hornsents obsessed over their divine ritual to create the optimal life form. Their society had a hierarchy of whoever had more horns is cooler, so they're kind of stupid. Instead of just living their life with the Crucible as a philosophical alignment, they wanted to achieve godhood through something that wasn't even remotely a god. Like, are you stupid? So Marika seduced them very easily. The first method was to charm them. Mikala was talented in charms and had a great rune that grants immunity to charms. Why wouldn't he have gotten that talent from his mom? Second, she convinced them of an actual method of ascension, which she was successful because there was an actual god to respond to her. Now, from the DLC story trailer, Marika walked up the gates of divinity with blood and flesh everywhere. Who were these people? I like to believe that they're what become of the shamans. After they turn into amalgamations, Marika requested that the Hornsents use the corpses of the shamans to lay them to rest, perhaps as a final push, a detrimental reminder that this is what happened for what she did. Forgive me, I swear I'll avenge you. None dear to me shall perish ever again. After Marika ascended to godhood, she played along with the Hornsents' bullshit. Messmer was born, and they established Shadowkeep, along with Rolana, a Carian princess that renounced her duties to the stars to be with Messmer. She became Messmer's sword, but she wishes for Messmer's 18-inch impaler. After the long purge by flames, Marika went back home to the shaman village one last time. Grabbing her hammer, she erected a minor Earth Tree, a powerful healing spell that bathed the village in gold, but there was no one left to heal. Within that moment, Marika must have realized how painful a gruesome fate like death was, how life would always end in death. No one would even remember the shamans like she did, as there is nothing that even mentions the shamans in the game. They were being forgotten, slowly disappearing from existence. A promise must have been uttered to herself. None shall ever die again. None dear to me shall ever die again. Everything that led up to this was the agony of consequence, the consequence of her actions. Why was Marika afraid of Messmer? Was she afraid of a little darkness and a snake? What are you, Gwyn? The Abyss was a mark of sin. The Golden Order probably only saw it as a mark that wasn't aligned with the Golden Order. Only Marika would know the sins of her consequence. The consequence of leading the Hornsents to her village. The consequence of the purge she was ordering. She couldn't look Messmer in the eye. Not anymore. So she split and completely sealed away the Lands of Shadow, abandoning everything, yet carrying everything still. Marika was so racked from the death of her kin that she wanted to break the cycle of life. She removed the rune of death from the Elden Ring and changed the concept of death with rebirth. No one will ever die, ever again. What order does rebirth do? Well, in the scheme of the greater will, controlling destined death is very handy. You can now choose who will die. But in Marika's perspective, it's getting rid of the consequences of life. After what happened to her kin, no one will ever die again. Now, come along along Godfrey, who became the first Elden Lord, waged war against a new threat to the Erdtree, the Fire Giants. The Fire Giants possessed the flame to burn the Erdtree, but I doubt they even had plans to. Marika kind of overreacted a bit and said kill all of them, which she was overreacting, but left one alive to tend to the Forge of the Giants, which is what Melna uses to burn the Erdtree in the game. Marika must have suspected that her reign wouldn't last somehow. Now come along a golden child, the child Marika must have loved the most, Godwyn the Golden. He made peace with the dragon, revered as a hero, was a loving figure to Melania and Mikola, especially Mikola. For the first time in what felt like a very long time, Marika was able to love again. She must have desired more children, more people to love, or maybe the Greater Will needed more Empyreans. Then came along the Omen twins. It must have been like a sick, twisted fucking joke by the Crucible. Even after the Crucible was overtaken by the Erdtree, it was still alive and infecting the lands between Moog and Morgoth, Omen-born twins. The Omens reminded her of the Hornsense. A great fear must have resurfaced. She buried the twins in the shunning grounds beneath Lanedale. She began ordering massacres and enslavement of the misbegotten. Omen children were to have their horns cut off. That seems like one hell of an overcorrection. And we see her do this time and time again. Her fear was always validated by the Greater Will. All that she did was to erase consequence of action. She was so scared of it that her actions throughout the history of Elden Ring were solely driven by it. What would happen if people found out about what happened to the shamans? Would she have to deal with the sin? What would happen if the Omens and Misbegotten were living as they please? Would they repeat the Hornsense? What would happen if the Fire Giants realized that their fire could burn the Erdtree? What if the people she cared about died? Could she handle the grief? If Marika truly lived for order, enforcing herself as the absolute ruler would have been the proper play, making sure everyone would abide by her order. But Marika and the Greater Will were such cowards that they didn't even want to allow the thought of an answer to any of these questions. What gives me confidence in this theory is the Mending Rune of Perfect Order. Specifically the Japanese translation of it. The imperfection of the current Golden Order is a result of a wavering perspective. There is no need for a god with a human heart. This was the flaw in the order, a human heart. Despite ascending to godhood, Marika's rule and overcorrection was purely human fear. Let's contrast that to someone we're very familiar with, Mikola. Mikola abandoned everything for his ascension to godhood to prevent anything like Marika's doing, especially abandoning his doubt, vacillation, and love. This is the law of causality, or rather, the denial of it. To deny the very consequence that happens after an action. Also contradictory to the law of regression, where all things return to their original state to regress. Marika was denying these laws by constantly changing the laws of nature. To use an example is with how death is in the game. What is the causality in death? The cycle of life goes from birth to life to death, and then grief and memory, and then completely forgotten. There's a clear consequence of birth and a finality to it, a permanence. By removing death from this equation, you only get the cycle of birth and life, as those who die return to the Erdtree and be reborn. Where is the causality of something that has no clear permanence? The regression in death. The stages of life are simple: non-existence, existence, and then back to non-existence. Those who live will die and will one day be completely forgotten as if they've never existed, regressing to non-existence. By removing death, things can never cease to exist. Eternal. Now with the birth of Godwyn and his achievements as a hero, Marika's faith in the Golden Order must have been already wavering. Why? Because despite everything that was done necessary to enforce order, another thing came after the next, as if nature and external forces were intentionally fucking up Marika's plans. When Marika and Radagon split, I believe the two carried different parts of the original Marika. Marika became the doubt and the wavering faith. Radagon became the enforcer of the Golden Order. As Melina says, "O Radagon, leal hound of the Golden Order, thou art yet to become me, thou art yet to become a god." With this, Radagon was another half of Marika, but was a mere husk. But then he literally became the Marika that was the enforcer of the Golden Order. To illustrate it, Mikola abandoned his love in the form of Saint Trina, his other self, and Saint Trina is nothing like Mikola. Then Radagon married Renala, and their houses were conjoined. They had 3 kids, Ronnie, Rykard, and Radahn, but they were even bigger proof that the order Marika had originally fought for became more and more fleeting. Ronnie sided with her mother and opposed the Greater Will. Rykard opposed the Greater Will and voluntarily entered a snake's mouth and got assimilated. He had no reason to do any of that, by the way. He wasn't tricked or manipulated or anything. He just thought, shit, I guess. Radon was probably the only one aligned with the Golden Order, but even then he sought glory more than anything because he admired Godfrey. When Radagon went back to America to go fuck himself, Melania and Mikola were born, both Empyreans but terribly afflicted. Melania by the outer god, Rot, and Mikola with eternal nascent. I choose the word nascent instead of youth because Vadividya explains it pretty well in his videos. Mikola is not just young in appearance, his logic behind the entire Age of Compassion is childish. All the more his nascence never allowed any of his plans to truly blossom. He couldn't follow through to cure Melania. He couldn't follow through to create a safe haven for the misplaced. He couldn't follow through to resurrect Godwyn. Everything was seemingly against the Golden Order Marika envisioned. Who wouldn't waver from that? 6 out of 10 children were actively fighting for their own fate. Then the unspeakable happened. Ronnie had Godwyn killed, Marika's beloved child. Even after changing the literal concept of death to prevent this very thing from happening, her beloved son died. Even worse, his soul died, and his body continued living, becoming those who live in death. Racked with grief, doubt, and fear, Marika came to the conclusion to shatter the Elden Ring. Why? What could have been gained in shattering the Elden Ring? Nothing. Nothing for her or Order. She must have been exhausted from living through fear and saw no future of Order with her demigod children. She stopped caring about the Golden Order, the Greater Will, her demigod children. All of her actions till now had been led by fear. For once, she committed a cardinal sin, embracing the consequence. Hear me, demigods, my children beloved. Make of thyself that which you desire, be it a lord, be it a god. But should you fail to become aught at all, you will be forsaken, amounting only to sacrifices. I don't think Marika is being cold or heartless here. I think she meant it in a very endearing way. If the demigods didn't become something, they will be forsaken by their kin, by the gods. It's Marika's way of telling the demigods to choose their own fate, not in the name of the Golden Order or the Greater Will. Perhaps when the Elden Ring was shattered, Marika allowed the demigods to steal a shard, as the two-fingered envoys were trying to direct the demigods to the Greater Will's plans, but all of them were dead. Unsuccessful of their envoys, the Greater Will sought Empyreans with the demigods, but these fucks were all selfish pieces of shit. Godwyn was killed in soul and spread a disease of death. Ronnie killed herself in flesh and ran away. Rykard willingly got eaten by a snake to oppose the Greater Will. Radon waged war because he sought glory. Mikola wanted to brainwash the world to bring upon his own age. Melania only wanted to help Mikola. Moog was partying with the Formless Mother. Morgoth did his best to govern Leyndell and protect the Erdtree. Moog and Morgoth were Omen children, so they were never even a choice. Radagon was still true to the Golden Order, and he tried to mend the Elden Ring, but failed. Marika and Radagon both failed the Greater Will. Both were punished. The Greater Will then fucked off because he saw that every single one of the demigods as incompetent, useless fucks.
Unfortunately for you, however, you are Maidenless.
The two fingers then guided the Tarnished back, thinking it's what the Greater Will would have wanted. This is where Melina comes into play as contingency. She doesn't serve the Golden Order, or anyone for that matter, not even Marika. She wanted change, because despite that it was her initial purpose given to her, she decided that she would do it out of her own volition. There was no bound duty. By burning the Erdtree, killing the embodiment of order, the Greater Will became more distant. Now the Elden Lord will rule a new world, and depending on the ending, you might regress the state of the lands between. A return to a rule under an Elden Lord, Age of Fracture, reinstating death as a natural cycle of life, Age of Dustborn. Basically letting the Crucible back into the world and punishing everyone, Blessing of Despair. Recreating the Golden Order in a perfect order by being heartless, Age of Golden. And then bringing back an age where no other god was influencing the world, Age of Stars. That is the Tarnished choice. Now, that theory is not really a theory and more like just like an interpretation of Marika's actions. Was it perfect? Absolutely not, but I still like it. This script took a lot to make, and I want to make more content like this, or content regarding stories in general, because, well, I am technically an author. If you're interested, please check out my novels. I have so many work in progress novels that I want to finish. In fact, by the time I'm making this, 2 would be very close to completion, and they're very different genres. If you stuck to the end, thank you so much. Please subscribe, that's the best way to support my insane self. With that, see you next time.